grew up in Santa Rosa area. My dad was a machinist, worked for the Navy. We had a small farm. I just really got interested in hot rods probably 12 or 14 years old. There was a fellow older fellow down the street that had a 32 Mercer. It was red and I think it probably had Olds motor in it, and it had real loud mufflers on it. And I used to watch that thing go up and down the road, and I said, that guy's really having a lot of fun with that car. And so he'd go fast by the ranch, you know. So. And I started buying hot rod magazines. There was a bookstore in Santa Rosa called Sawyer's, and we'd go into town on Friday and deliver stuff and whatever, and I'd go to the bookstore and pick up, you know, the little magazines and the hot rod magazines, and just kind of basically started in and be very interested in hot rods and Ford. Once we get them welded up get them on the jig, then they come over here and we assemble the whole car. We assemble everything on the car, so it all fits, and then from there it goes to the body paint. We're gonna go over there today. We're gonna go over there. Are you going over there Saturday? Here's another one. These became basically a lot of fit and finish. We were doing not early on, but several years ago, we were doing a lot of primered cars and lower end cars with not a lot of plating and not a lot of fit and finish. And I kind of went past that now into the cars that are a little bit more detailed and shinier. And the reason being is the economy now will support this. For years, if you built a car like this, you would probably make 50 cents an hour for your labor, and you never get your money out of these cars because the flathead cars are not popular. And these cars are basically very, very time consuming. This kind of car, you spend hours and hours doing making all this stuff fit right, putting all original style wires and all the nuts and all that stuff are all period, so the cars, again, period correct, and that takes a lot of time.
H&H started back in '68 with my dad in his parents' garage. And then I went through school, went through college, and came back here and started working for my brother who was doing the 4-cylinders with my dad. And I've been just doing flatheads non-stop ever since. This is like a giant dishwasher. It rotates on the table and has a bunch of jets that shoot out hot chemical. Just hose it off a little bit, a little air pressure. That's how we get the majority of the grease off these cranks before we sandblast them and clean them up even more. It all just started from, one engine doing one job to the next until it turned into a snowball effect where I'm pumping out like 80 to 100 motors a year, and doing some of the fun stuff now.
Cars in general started when I was 11 or 12. I used to hang out at a friend's dairy farm that was down the street from where I lived, and they had an old Model A that had the body all cut off it, and they had built a wooden platform on the back, and they used it around the farm for hauling hay, different things. And I started learning how to drive when I was 11 or 12, I guess. And if the Model A wouldn't run, my friend's father wouldn't help us fix it. He would give us hints on what might be wrong with it. So that kind of whetted my appetite for things mechanical. This car came about when my youngest of 3 kids was a sophomore in high school. I told Marge, my wife, that I really wanted to get back into the old car hobby. I'd been going to a few cruises and was seeing cars that reminded me of when I was a young kid. And I wanted to build the car that I never could really build when I was in high school because I didn't have the money. So I told her that I was going to start, looking in the papers for cars or parts or whatever. And a friend of mine knew of a fellow that was putting a Z28 drivetrain in a 38 Ford, and the whole drivetrain was sitting out behind his garage. So I was able to buy it for, I think it was $100 I paid for that. It came with a front axle with hydraulic brakes, the rear end with hydraulic brakes, the engine and transmission. And then I didn't know what I was going to build at the time, but in '75, when my parents sold their house, I had given another friend a Model A frame that I had bought for another Model A I had that had a bad frame, but I had never used it. And after about a year of asking him if he was ever going to use it again, he finally gave it to me, and so that was the beginning of a Model A. When I was building the car, I knew I wanted a Thixton high-rise manifold. Because that's what I had on my 34 back in the early 60s. And I looked everywhere for them, and the ones I found were either cracked or somebody had drilled a hole someplace it shouldn't be. And in passing, I mentioned to a friend of mine, Dick Husalis, who campaigns a big-inch flathead dragster. He lives in Barnstable, Mass. He said he had one in his collection. I said, oh boy, I'd love to find one. He says, well, you can have this one. I'll sell it to you for exactly what I paid for it. And he'd bought it several years earlier from a guy in California. He paid $250 for it. Now, I never saw one that cheap. I've seen them $600 and $700, but he sold it to me for the $250. But then he told me, he says, if I ever see your car and you don't have the manifold on the car, I'm coming to your house and I'm taking it back. It's not to be put on a coffee table on display.
You know what I like about what allure, like you say, allure of the Flathead? You got to think back that when Ford first built that V8 motor in '32, They not only gave us that, but they gave us that car, right? I mean, what a good deal that was, right? So the first hot rod guys all built flatheads. I mean, that's where it all started. So if you got any interest in hot rodding, you think right away, where did this all start? You know, so you're drawn back to this early day stuff.
It's the original hot rod motor, I think. There were the Ford four bangers and the Ford V8s when this came out in 1932. Up until like probably early 50s, it dominated hot rodding.
It's an icon, basically, is what, you're after, the I remember when type situation. And they're dependable if you build them right.
You can't buy a flathead motor. You can't call Summit, say, I want to make 450 horsepower, and you write a check and they send you the parts. A flathead engine has to be created.
Flatheads are just cool. I mean, it's tradition. It's timeless. It's one of the best motors Ford ever made, and there's a reason why it still sticks out at a show. And I mean, they are showstoppers. It's just something different with all the heritage. That's where hot rodding started. So it's really important to me to keep it going. Yeah. So now I'm just gonna put some assembly grease on the mains, because you never want to start this up dry or assemble dry, because it will just smoke bearings instantly. Now I'm gonna lay the crank. It's only 65 pounds, so you just gotta be gentle. They do make slings, but that's for 10 years from now, and I can't even lift that. Now I'm just putting on the rear main cap right here. It takes, now here with these main caps, the center and the front, the difference is you can see how this tang is closer to the bolt hole. It's actually in the bolt hole, and that one's over. This is always the front cap, and this is the center. So that's the way, because they look real close, and you can mix these up and that will seize your motor. But you always look for the tangs. Make sure this one is notched forward into, and that's more off to the right. Got it. It's always tang on tang also, so this tang goes down to the tang in the block. And with flatheads, the late model blocks that I'm doing, the APAs, it takes lock washers on the back four, and the fronts do not take it. It has a shorter bolt, and it just bolts right down. Let me get my gun. Now I'll torque it to 85 pounds. The difference between the flathead blocks through the years is they started out with a 21 stud block with Babbitt mains, and it had water pumps in the head.
The early engines up to 36 were a Babbitt poured engine, which means it did not have insert bearings. They actually took tin and lead, melted it in a fire, and poured it into the block and stamped it with a mold, and then they would machine it so that there's no really replaceable parts. They would just shim it so that as it wore, you would take the shims out and keep increasing the clearances.
Of course, Ford started building engines in 1932, and the first engines had the cylinder heads attached to the block with 21 studs. The later ones, 1939, late 38, 24 stud.
Down here, you can easily tell what a 21 stud block looks like because it has 3 center bolts, whereas the later ones only have 2. So you don't even have to count, just look down the center, 3.
The early motors also had the water pumps built into the cylinder heads. They sat typically right at the front of the cylinder head, and the water inlet from the top of the radiator tank would be just a straight shot to the pump.
From 32 to 48, they used a floating rod, which the connecting rod that connects to the crankshaft. Again, like the block in the earlier version, they used a cord rod end on the early ones. Then they went to a insert, but it was a full floating bearing versus a staked bearing.
Yeah, the Flathead is the way most engines were built from the beginning of the internal combustion engine. The valves were in the block, and the combustion chamber was in the head. The head covered the piston and the valves. It was called either an L head because the combustion chamber formed the shape of an L. It's also referred to as valve and block. The efficiency of the Flathead was okay until people started wanting power steering and air conditioning, so the Flathead was doomed.
Flatheads are so simple that a guy like me can figure them out. This car was built a lot like a kid coming back from World War II. He'd done a lot in the war, learned a lot in the war, and wanted to build a fast car, kind of a Rosetta timing club looking coupe, and it's built with a lot of those parts. So, I mean, pretty much everything on it is pre-47, so it's an early post-war hot rod. So it's an early quick change, early 47 Merc block. Everything on it's fairly early for a Flathead car. So it's built a lot like a kid would have built his car when he was coming back from the war.
Is if you can find like a original timing tag that was stamped between 47 and 51. So the SCTA had 3 of these machines, but the way they're done, it's old technology, so they're not, the tolerances aren't perfect. And so you can tell which ones this machine stamped and which ones the other ones did. It's pretty neat. I did an article on Tom Cobb's car, and he had a tag from 47, and this machine actually stamped it because the spacing was exactly the same.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Mostly the Flatheads are basically all the same from 32 to 53. They went through a couple of changes. They had a 21 stud cylinder head version up till 1937. Then in 38 they went to 24 studs because, like anything that was going through an evolution, they were trying to make more power.
In 1937, they changed to water pumps in the block and insert main bearings. And that went for only a year and a half. It went to about beginning of 38. And then it went to the 24 stud.
The later motors, they reconfigured it, and the water pumps were then designed and built into the block on the lower end of the block. And it changed all the spacing too. So to take an early motor and put it into, say, a later Ford chassis after 37, you're involved with adapters if you want to do some early swapping around, which is what the early hot rod guys found themselves dealing with.
Like from 37 on up to the 50s, that engine, I could make my motor mounts, my transmission mounts, and everything, and any engine in that era would fit. The 32 to 36s, you had to juggle the different motor mounts that they came with to make them fit in different chassis.
And then it went to the 24 stud, which looks like this. These are the 2 holes right in the center to show that it's a 24 stud motor. And this is the later 46 to 48 block that says 5.9 on the bell housing. This is the best one if you want the bell housing style because it's a 239 cubic inch motor. So it has insert mains and all the good stuff.
But nothing is interchangeable in terms of the heads on those 21 studs with the later motors, which are the 24 stud. Once you get into the 24 stud motors, like late 38 all the way up to 53, you can swap those heads back and forth with some small changes.
They use basically the same block from 38 to 48. Small changes in the crankshaft. The cylinder heads are all interchangeable. Intake manifolds are all interchangeable.
All the early motors, by that 32 to 48, all had the distributors on the front of the engine.
The early motors had a 3-bolt distributor down in the front.
The 8BA style motor, which is like 49 to 53, those engines had a different timing cover on the front with a different camshaft that had a gear on the front to allow the distributor to be driven right off the cam.
And then 49 to 53, it came a top mount, side mount distributor, which is the best. It actually has a timing mark on the crank pulley, so you could actually use a timing gun and time it instead of just by ear, and you could reach it and not get your knuckles chopped off by the fan. The blocks I prefer for a race motor is either a 59A or an 8BA. They're both internally almost identical. I mean, we poured them really big, intakes and exhaust, and we put steel main caps on the mains. Scat now makes new cranks, H-beam rods, Ross pistons, ProFlow valves. That's what I do for every blower motor, and then race motors, we just get a little more crazy on the porting and bigger valves and stuff like that, bigger stroke. On generally all rings, they put a dot on them, and that's always to face the top of the piston. You gotta be careful putting these rings in, because if you fold one over right here, I mean, you'll have oil just coming up. These are oil control rings. And it's happened. It sucks. You see how this ports are like have a lip right here? These are Barney's secret ports for Bonneville, and he added more material to the patterns and ported them massive. So it's like a secret. If you didn't really know what you were looking for, you wouldn't know that that was a special manifold. And they only cast a few of those. I found it down in San Diego a couple of years ago.
I cannot how they blew this morning.
Here's what happened to last year to our Bonneville car. We leaned it out and burned the top right out of the piston, so we didn't have real good luck last year with the Bonneville car. But this is what can happen. And I had some broken pistons and rods here. Oh, here, this was pretty common with what happened to the rods early on. And this one was a boxed one, but the rods would just fail because they were so small, and you try to get them pretty light, and then they'd just break off. You know, a lot of this. Once the motor breaks, it just busts everything inside. Breaks the cam in half and breaks the whole block. But my most favorite explosion. Let me show you this one here. This one I'm pretty proud of. This explosion out here. This was about 150 miles an hour. It took out the whole. It took the whole inside of the block out. Just killed it. Well, we were running a Bonneville. We had a modified roadster, and we were running. I think we're probably running for a record, and it just gave up, and it blew up about into the 2-mile mark. And then the guy I wasn't driving the car. Larry just kicked it into gear and shut it off, and then we pulled the hood off, and the car had a belly pan on, and every bit of the bottom, all the stuff was laying in the bottom of the car. But it blew the cylinder walls out of it, and blew 2 cylinder walls right out of the block. That was one of my best explosions. I would suggest if they're doing a flathead motor that they try to find one that has no cracks in it, no repairs. Repair is possible on these motors, but then you're taking a chance. If they cracked once, then they're probably at one time it got real hot. So there might be a possibility maybe the repair hole, but the next cylinder cracks. So try to find a block that has no cracks, and it's hard to do, but if you're going to be serious about this thing, then you need to find a good base, and that's the block is the base of the whole thing.
No, we're at 450 lift. I want to run a 500 lift cam. So we're right there is at 500 lift, which is flowing 156 CFM. And I run it up to 550 just to see if it changes. And usually what I found, you can see right there, I actually lost 3 CFM because the valve is too close to the cylinder head. So with the valve being too close to the cylinder head, you're actually disrupting the flow over the head.
You're causing turbulence right there.
Right. And what else I found that where I made actually my largest leap in flowing, this little stack. When I was first flowing, I couldn't really get over 130 CFM, 133, and I couldn't understand why. So the first thing I did is I took a little piece of pipe and cut this piece of pipe and put it on the intake manifold like this. And I got 4 CFM immediately. And I said, oh, okay, because the air is too disrupted down the tube. So then I ended up making this pipe, which is 1.67 inches, which will be the runner diameter that we're gonna run. Yep. So, and I tapered it, I used the goop, actually it's dum-dum,
right,
to bond it and to fill the little bit of a void because the port isn't quite that big. And this has been my best design so far for CFM. I did try to get something that would stand up because it would be easier to build an intake if it was standing up. Mm-hmm. But because we're turning the air, unless I can put more of an arch here, I split it and widened it and it didn't help. So unless I can put more of a belly in here, it slows the air down because every time you turn the air...
This works better.
That's the best so far. And what we might end up doing is just building the base plate, having a runner, and then just put a second plate right here with the tube sticking into it and build the box to put the carburetor on.
Mm-hmm. What got me into hot rodding is probably about 6 years ago. I wanted to build a motorcycle. So I went to welding school at night, learned how to weld. I bought a frame, put together this kind of new school, old school thing that I really didn't like that much after it was done. But while I was building that, trying to figure out how I wanted to paint it, I started looking at these hot rods, and the more I learned about it, I just got interested in it. I just was like, wow, I gotta have one of those cars. I need to have a traditional hot rod. So I just started collecting parts. My first car was a 30 Model A coupe. It was building on a 32 chassis. It was already rolling together, and I was like, I have so much more work. And I was like, started looking at 32 Fords, because all this time I'm learning more and more and more about cars and hot rods and stuff. And I'm like, wow, I really want a 32. And if I'm going to do all this work, I decided that I'd find a 32. The Pines Winterfront was a pretty rare option in 32, basically made for the cold area climates. So you could shut the louvers and let the motor heat up. And that's basically what it was. And they're pretty, from what I understand and what I hear from people, that's definitely probably one of the rarest 32 options that you come across. So I was pretty happy to get it. The motor came from a local junkyard here, Blanchard's Junkyard. It's a 59A. It has a Merc crank. It's been bored over. It's 276 cubic inch. It's got stainless valves. It's got a Latirio L100 cam, Johnson lifters. It's got a Lighton flywheel, Auburn clutch. The machine work and the assembly of the motor was done by a guy named Teddy Wingate. And he's old hot rodder. He's one of the original tie rod members. I have an Evans heads and intake. The Evans heads I got off of Donna Roscoe. They were NOS, which is really nice for him to sell them to me. I'm using 3 Stromberg 81s with straight linkage, running a Harman Collins dual coil with dual 6-volt Mallory ignitions. The car's 12 volt, but I have some ballast on the coils that run it down to 6 volt, and it's been flawless.
This is an interesting right angle drive because a lot of them bolt on directly to the engine. This was made by a company called Barker, and what's nice about this is it clamps on with 3 clamps, and once it's on the front of the engine, you can actually rotate the position of it. I'm going to use this on the Arden, but you could use it on any flathead engine, So this tang right here just couples directly to the front of the camshaft to drive it, and whenever you look at these, you'll usually see that on a stock flathead Ford distributor, this little cam is not in the center. It's offset to one side so that you can only put it on one way. You have to be aware of that when you're assembling this stuff so you don't break anything. But that ensures that you get the timing correct. So it's kind of a rare piece. This particular blower is set up for a flathead Ford. It's an original Scott set up with 2 Stromberg 97 carburetors. I have all the original Scott pulleys, including the original crank pulley, which has got the steel hub inside the aluminum pulley, which is a nice piece. That'll be going on the crank. This particular part was also offered by them, and it's the generator mount, which you very rarely would see. But this generator mount would attach to either side of the cylinder head and bolt up over here, and then you could put your generator inside this bracket and drive it, So it's a really nice piece to have if you've got a Scott blower and you want all the right parts for the setup.
1948 Ford 59A block. It's me going in a 35 Ford 3-window. Car is presently being metal worked at Dave Simard's shop in Massachusetts. It's a 4 1/8 inch stroke, 3 5/16 bore. It's got big intake valves, stock size exhaust, high performance valve. It's undercut underneath the stem for a little bit better airflow. Help the engine a little bit. It's been ported and relieved right here in this shop. It's going to be one of the more ultimate flatheads you want to put in your car. It's an original cam that's been reprofiled. This cam's going to have 270 degrees duration, 375 lift. What we're going to do is put in the rod assembly. Like assembling them straight up and down like this, it makes it go a lot easier. And what it did is, most guys will end up with this type of engine stand, and this is just bolted to the exhaust ports. It's the best way really to set up the flathead on an engine stand like this. Ford Flathead's nice, no chains, so you have to line up timing marks, dot to dot, which I've identified with the darker mark. There it is.
This is my 39 two-door sedan. My friend's uncle approached me and he said he had a 39 truck and this car in his backyard and he really wanted a motor. So I went down and looked at it and this car was just in there, bone stock, mohair and everything. So this is the second paint job. He actually painted it in the late 70s with black lacquer. And so I left it just the way it was. And we did everything, frame off, powder coat everything, straightened out the frame. 4-inch drop front axle. It's got brake drums all the way around. We put one of our Scott blower motors in here. It's got 250 horse, T5 behind it, and we replicated a push car. And so we took it out on the dry lakes and pushed Barney Navarro's car for the cover rotting custom.
And that was the baseline now, and you're trying to get more horsepower out of it. So you've got this whole system together, and you started measuring what we had initially, right?
Where we're going. Pretty much we started out, I built this motor in 2004 for a performance street engine. And it performed very well, very, very well for a flathead in a 3,200 pound car. The ports I made particularly small for high-speed intake velocity, and we took it to Bonneville. Before we took it, I pulled it out, put a set of Navarro high-flow heads and pistons. This Nostalgia head only flows 111 CFM.
Yeah.
A stock Mercury 8 cm head flows more. Mm-hmm. And then this is the heads that we ran, the high flow, and this is what it's taken. This is the first configuration when we were at Bonneville 2 years ago, and this is where I am right now with getting the 150 CFM out of it. So I've dropped the depth.
Took some out of the
90 thousandths. I've taken 90 thousandths out of here, and I've taken that point off. Taking that point off made an incredible difference.
right here in the intake area.
Yeah, all in the intake area. This point made 10 CFM right there, getting rid of that point.
Now, weren't you thinking that the piston, this machined dome, wasn't dead on aligned with the dome of the piston?
It was
It's
off
offset
by,
a little
was
bit.
offset down by about 40 thousandths.
Yeah. And ideally, you want them dead nut.
Has to be
on the
perfect.
same,
You
so
have to
that
have you have to have about 40 thousandths piston clearance the whole way around, and this piston
because of the dome.
needs to fit into that pocket perfectly with 40 thousandths clearance.
And right now, we found it's a little this way, you're saying.
The dome is down.
Yeah.
The dome is down, so literally the piston is fitting up in the hole. This is exaggerated, but it's fitting in the hole like this. Therefore, if you look here, you see the black? That's where it's firing, and it's not down here because there's too much clearance.
Yeah.
That's dead space. And if you look at the piston reads the same way. The fire was up here, and there was nothing down there.
Flatheads were from my heyday. I've been involved with cars since the early 40s. When I was a kid, I worked in a body shop across the street from the Polo Grounds in New York City. And flatheads were very popular, for hot rodding, even back then in the mid-40s, late 40s. People would buy high compression heads, put two-barrel Strombergs on them. It's kind of novel to see a flathead dressed out and looking good. As far as I'm concerned, they're a damn good motor. All you got to do is change the oil, change the filter, and just drive the heck out of it. And they'll treat you right. These old flatheads used to go forever back in the old days. And living proof right here, Sebastian Rubo put 450,000 miles on this car. And he used to build them with used parts, new parts, whatever he could get his hands on that were cheap. Because Sabi didn't have a lot of money.
I kind of always wanted a full 32. And we came across this body. I came from Texas, and the guy's like, man, I got a car going up to San Francisco, via LA. If, you can work something out. And he brought the body by. Actually, we dropped it at Vern's house right there. That was it. Sold the Roadster body and started building this.
My car here is a late 40s style dry lakes car. Couldn't have any other motor in it. This was my first flathead. I drove it for about 7 years with 4-carb intake. Then I found this blower, supercharger, and had to go for it.
To get more power out of a flathead, if you were starting with just a bone stock flathead powered car, let's say like a 40 Ford Coupe, no one had ever touched the engine. It just had a 2-barrel carburetor, stock ignition in it, and a stock single exhaust. The first thing you'd probably do is do a dual exhaust system, just to get a little bit more horsepower, because those cars were only about 100 horse to start with. And if you were trying to attain 200 horsepower, you'd have to spend a lot of money. But if you're going to try to get like 25% more power out of it, it wouldn't be hard to do with just first at least changing the exhaust, then put a set of heads on it, set of aluminum heads, or mill your original heads just to get the compression up a little bit, because the stock compression is down around 6-1. So if you could bump that up to 8-1.
One of the things, in fact, probably the best thing you can do that doesn't cost a lot of money is have the heads milled. You can mill a stock flathead about 50 or 60 thousandths and boost your compression the whole point. And that'll really wake up a flathead, and according to the experts, it even improves fuel economy.
Another thing they would do is they put aluminum cylinder heads on, which would increase the compression ratio a little bit, make a little more power.
Easy things to do to these motors to get more horsepower out of them is a stroker crank instantly adds cubic inches. You can't beat cubic inches. You know, you put a 3/4 cam in these things, aluminum heads for higher compression, and a couple carburetors and a hotter ignition. Just like any motor, you're going to get more horse. And generally, I mean, these things aren't built to set the world on fire.
The other thing you can do to make a flathead run nice is a 2-carb manifold. Run a couple of 94s or 97s. I prefer the Thixton. The thing I like about the Thixton high rise is you can still run the generator in the stock position. You know, you can run the fan right off the generator if you want. And that's a good street manifold. It performs really well at low speed and as fast as you want to drive it.
The big thing about flatheads is letting them breathe. And a lot of guys early did that with cams and then intake packages. So a lot of the early combination flatheads are a cam and a dual intake, which is exactly what this car is. And then later they got into stroking them with 4-inch Merc cranks and stuff like that.
And then maybe just add a 2-carb manifold. That would be pretty much all bolt-on. Easy to do for the first go around without taking the engine out of the car. If you wanted to get a little more horsepower, now you're going to get into it kind of deep. You're going to have to pull the engine out, pull the cam out.
The most amount of power that you can get out of the motor is by boring it and putting a stroke crank in it. And that's where the most amount of bang for your buck is.
If you'd like to get into the inside of the engine, you would change the camshaft.
Now you're going to get into the whole lower end of the motor, pulling the crank rods and pistons, probably boring the engine, again changing the pistons to even get a little bit more compression out of it, and maybe even putting a bigger camshaft in at that point.
First, we're going to try to find out if we could get a general height to preset all the lifters. I'm going to get a pre-dimension, make a note of it. 690. So I'm going to shrink down all of them. Put a lube on the bottom of the lifters when it fires up so it doesn't wipe out the camshaft. So Isky makes a nice product for that. On the Flathead, these here guides, there's a seal on the intake one where the exhaust doesn't need it. So I'm going to put a shim under the guide to help, it's going to increase the valve spring pressure a little bit. These valve springs are the Zephyr reproductions, which gives us more seat and lift pressure. There's one assembly ready to go in. Now comes the fun. Trying to pull it in the block. there's a notch up in there. We're going to get onto the guide and pull it down so we can put this keeper in. Hopefully we can squeeze our hand in here to do it.
In 1955, Chevrolet came out with their small block Chevrolet, which became the engine of choice because of the horsepower, the lightweight, and you were able to shoehorn them into anything. They fit very well into any Ford of the 30s or 40s. And flatheads kind of started to drift away. Come the 60s, everybody was into overhead valve V8. But there were always the old diehards that loved their flatheads.
Chickens